what are the biggest challenges and opportunities for education in the UAE?
I think in terms of the growth and the opportunity, first of all, I mean, the UAE is only 50 years old, so it's still such a young country. And so the opportunity for the education systems to grow and develop and to like learn from like people from professors from different places and different education styles is something that's really possible. And just seeing how education has changed from when I was in high school until now, like my sister is 9 years younger than me, seeing the education system she went through in Dubai is very different in a good way, where she all of a sudden got exposure to different curriculums, to different educational systems, whether it was the British system or the US or, and so on. And I think in that sense, it just shows how even just within 9 years, it can change so much and it's continually adapting. So that's one real benefit and like opportunity. Another, because it's income tax free, it's something that allows, and the salaries you get, people will think Dubai is expensive, but the fact is the salaries you get will account for that. That's just like if you live, New York, your salary will very likely be, well, hopefully will be higher than if you live in somewhere where the cost of living is a lot less. I think Dubai tries to do that to the extent possible so you can have a good standard of living. And so a lot of young professionals start their career out, and Dubai is really attractive to them. And again, it benefits us because we're getting all this young talent, these people who are still not jaded by whatever industry they're in. They're still passionate about it. And especially in education, again, I have no teaching background, no education, no study in how education systems work, but I am someone who was a student, and I've seen the benefits of being taught by people passionate about what they do, or even administrators passionate about what they do. And so if we can attract that talent, that's what's going to help the students, and that's what's going to help education systems in the UAE overall grow. In terms of a challenge, I think, and I honestly don't really know how to solve this one other than to tell people, other than to hold forums like this and to talk more openly about the UAE and have people go experience it for themselves. Because I think the biggest challenge is whenever the UAE does make international headlines, there's often a tendency by bigger international like media sources to talk about the issue, but then also to highlight perhaps some problems in the region or issues of contention. Example, they'll raise the Qatar issue, or there'll be issues of women's rights. And again, we have 3 to 5 minutes to talk, so I'm not gonna give any of those topics the attention they deserve right now, so I won't dive into them. But I mention it because I think when young professionals are coming in, especially in something like academia, where you work so hard for so long, and when there's all this tendency to focus on the problem areas of the UAE market and what's happening around the Middle East in a larger context, I think it creates this negative stigma. And I've heard this from people in academia, that if you're someone with integrity and you care for freedom and equality, and going to the UAE is something you would just do, you'd put them aside and you just go for money. And I think that's a really unfair stigma. And it puts the UAE at such a disadvantage, because then these really passionate people who can truly make a difference for such a young country are being deterred from going to the UAE, from seeing the opportunities there for their own growth and to inspire the population there. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think there needs to be more discussions about the UAE, about our culture, about the diversity, just like Mahin was talking about, and the really great opportunities that, and learning experience on both sides that can happen. So I feel like that's the biggest hurdle the UAE has to face when trying to expand and continue to grow its educational systems.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, Alan, you're up.
All of you attending have your own unique identities and all your own backgrounds. And that won't change when you go to the UAE or any different international context. So the UAE does have racism, it does have sexism, it does have patriarchal systems still at hand, and there's bigotry, there's discrimination. So one of the biggest challenges is how is a young country going to operate within those, but hopefully get rid of those systems and become a country that can get rid of some of these systems that plague other countries. But I kind of want to shift the question to think about what are the biggest challenges and opportunities for you while looking for jobs there. So the biggest challenge as someone who's from a working class background, from a first generation family, of how did I find these jobs in the UAE? There's a barrier there. So the opportunity for you is if you get these, you're gonna get a great global lifestyle, you're getting exposed to diversity on an unprecedented level. But the challenge is getting, your foot through the door. So you have, a dozen or so panelists today that hopefully you can reach out to if you're thinking about opportunities in education or broader within the UAE, of helping make sense of that challenge. So the UAE has a lot of challenges that we can get really nitty and gritty and dirty about, but there's also challenges for yourself of thinking about how can we get to the UAE for those opportunities for you to reap the benefits of personally, professionally, and academically.
In 2015, the UAE embarked on a partnership with Stanford University, through which Stanford developed kind of like a core but modular curriculum about innovation and entrepreneurship. And so what they did from 2015 to 2018 is, for each year, for a week in the summer, they selected 30 faculty from different universities across UAE. And so Casiana and I were actually both selected for the third and final cohort. Really kind of, focused my mindset into that space. And even in some of the other courses I was teaching, it really sort of infiltrated. Because of that, I'm actually now the director of something called the Each One Teach One Entrepreneurship Institute here. And we primarily focus on giving underrepresented youth, like high school age, education, opportunity to really kind of forge a new path and realize there are doors that can be opened, or that they can open, that they might not even realize were unlocked. So it's kind of interesting to see this progression of things and connecting dots. So I don't know if Casiana wanted to speak to your experience at Stanford and how it might have impacted in your area that you were teaching when you came back to UAE.
The program actually started in March that year, and it went for like almost a year, because we connected to the other cohorts. We went to Abu Dhabi. We continue to keep in touch with the other, like our cohort and other ones, and make sure that we don't forget what we learn and we implement what we learn. But for me, I use some of the exercises in my own classes, and that still work. It's design thinking. And that for me was a really eye-opening opportunity.
Initially, it started in the college level, and every college was required to have an innovation and entrepreneurship course. And so they really want to kind of give people the education and the initiative to start their own businesses, to do something that doesn't require them to rely on the government to fund it. So,
besides the tax incentives and the lifestyle incentives to move to Dubai and the UAE as a whole, I think you talk about, being entrepreneurial, Matt. I think that is something that, especially for a professional, whether it doesn't matter if you're young or old or whatever, but that's passionate about what they're doing in education, I would hope they would appreciate that there is capital that can be invested in people, in programs, and you can be part of this young country that wants to develop. It does have its own problems, of course. And you do, to an extent, need to understand the culture to learn how to work within it, and how best to try to implement changes that you think will help the next generation. But yeah, I think it's, I would hope, at least as a UAE national, that people would see the real opportunity of, coming in and shaping this new young country, and, empowering the younger people, like the next leaders of that generation.